We are here in Helsinki, and we have here with us international guest Hakan Cifci. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Hakan Cifci, and I'm member of Foreign Relations Committee of Kurdistan National Congress. It's a congress which has been existed for 25 years, working to unify all Kurdish people to find a solution for the Kurdish question in the region, but at the same time help here in diaspora to contribute to peaceful solution in the region.
Could you tell a little bit more, like your work there, you travel a lot, and what are you doing?
So, one important part of the Kurdistan National Congress committees is the diplomatic committee, because it's very important to make a lobby about the Kurdish question, but at the same time make awareness about the situation and get the support, and also give the correct information about what's going on in the region. So we are working with information network, we are working with lobby network, we are also working with conferences, panel discussions, and seminars to address the issue, because a lot of people have a lot of questions. And we are gathering a lot of our reports from the ground and reflect it out to the world.
Kurds are, some say they are the largest people in the world without state. It's 20 to 40 million, something like this.
It's more than 40 million, actually.
More than 40.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, and the Kurdistan area is like under 4 different parts occupied in Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, and of course then many Kurds, like you said, live in diaspora, Europe and other parts of the world. Maybe before going into deeper to these regions, could you tell a little bit more like what is the situation for the Kurdish movement right now? What are like big questions and so on?
Well, it's very difficult for many people to understand the Kurdish question, because it's very complex, and it's very natural that it's difficult for people to understand, because this is not a conflict between two parts. This is a conflict between several parts, and there is 4 regimes: Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria, who are oppressing, colonizing Kurdistan. But at the same time, in Kurdistan, you have hegemonic powers. You have gangs, you have companies which are exploiting Kurdistan. So there is many actors in Kurdistan. And the Kurdish freedom movement, the Kurdish people has to deal with this. And the situation becomes very, very much complex. But in all these 4 regimes, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria, Kurds are not recognized in any of the constitutions. And the constitutions in these countries are actually built on the military mentality. It's the military constitutions. It's not civilian constitutions. It's not democratic constitutions. So Kurds have been fighting for decades to find their right to live as an independent people in these regions. But unfortunately, the Western countries have also very much interest in the region, and that becomes a much more difficult situation. But one of the key countries in the region is Turkey, mostly because Turkey is a NATO member, but at the same time, Turkey's position as a geographic country, the position in the geographic place in the Middle East makes Turkey very much important. And the denial of the existence, the denial of the Kurds, and not recognizing Kurds as people has escalated this conflict, because Kurds are fighting for the fundamental rights. They are not demanding more than what other peoples have. But unfortunately, Kurds do not have any fundamental rights today. Even if they have written something in paper, but in practically, Kurdistan is colonized, and this colonization is a very big problem. So it's very natural for the Kurds to take the self-defense mechanism and fight against this colonization. And of course, other hegemonic powers has a very different interest. U.S. has different interest. Iran has a different interest. Israelis have different interest. Russians have a different interest because they are also in conflict between each other. And in the middle of these interests, Kurds become squeezed because they are also fighting for their rights. So when you look at in Turkey, there is a huge escalation of war going on inside Turkey and Kurdistan, but also beyond the borders of Turkey. And Turkey has been using a lot of proxy groups to fight against the Kurds. And they are trying to manipulate the society that as if Kurdish question doesn't exist. It only exists just because there are some people who are making rebels against them, but they are forgetting that Kurdish question already existed for a very long time ago. So it's a result of this rebellion is a result of this the oppression on the Kurds. So the whole aim is to assimilate the Kurds, to not to be Kurds. In Syria, they have been forced to be Arabs. In Turkey, they have been forced to be Turks. In Iran, they have been forced to be Persians, but also in Iraq, they have been forced to be Arabs. And even if the methodology is different, the aim is same. The assimilation policies has been running in social level, in economical level, in in cultural level, because there is a genocide going on, not only physically but also a genocide which is culturally, and this is done slowly but surely. It's not like it's something which is happening in one day or 1 month. But these are policies which has been implemented in the constitution. For example, in Syria, in Rojava, most of the Kurds, they didn't have any identity cards. They had an identity card called strangers, for example. And most of the Kurds in other areas, they have been alienated. So alienation of the Kurds has been a policy in all countries. It's a little bit different. In Iran, you have the theocratic system ruled by religious extremist leaders. Then in Turkey, they claim that there is a secular system, but at the same time, it's based on Turkish nationalism. So it's not so much different from each other. And the same system you had in Syria and used the same system you had in Iraq. And the Kurds had to sacrifice a lot to come to this position today, what they have now, what they have gained now. And the hope in the people continues, because a population of 40 million, you cannot just deny that they exist. And I'm also a victim of this denial policy. In Turkey, I was beaten to not speak Kurdish, and I was beaten to learn Turkish. So, of course, this creates kind of question marks in many young people in the generation, why it is like that. And now Kurds have come so far, and they have made a revolution in many aspects of life. They have made revolution in political aspect. They have made revolution in the self-defense aspect. They have made revolution in cultural aspect. And what the problem is now today, that there is a new reality of Kurds, yes, and the countries like Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, they know that they have to change some way. But they don't want to change in a way where they accept the new reality of the Kurds. They say that we want to go back to the system that we deny the Kurds. but we want to be a new country. And how is it going to happen? It's impossible. You cannot deny the new generation and tell them now you are not Kurd anymore. And the constitution in all these countries doesn't allow for not only Kurds but also other people with different backgrounds to identify themselves as independent people in the region. So Kurds are having also destiny with these people. That's why they get a lot of support. They say, we have the same destiny because of the alienation policy in these countries, also in Syria, also in Turkey, also in Iraq, and also in Iran. Many people felt themselves alienated. So when Kurds are struggling, they are actually not only struggling for themselves. They are struggling for other peoples with different background, belief background, ethnical background. And that's why a lot of the problems here is not only local problems, because a lot of the problems here in this region is also affecting other places in the world. It's even affecting Europe. What's happening in the Middle East, you cannot say that it doesn't affect Europe. It does actually. So it's a global problem. So in these global problems, where people are searching for answers for a lot of different questions, the question about democracy, the question about human rights, the question about ecology, the question about gender rights, they're asking where we can get answers. And in the Kurdish people's own paradigm, where it's very much largely supported, where the engineer behind this paradigm called democratic confederalism is Abdullah Öcalan. And he has been in isolation for 25 years. And the last 3.5 years, there is no voice from him. Mostly because the idea, which has been also inspiration for the revolution in Rojava, is a very important idea for the people to organize themselves. But the regional forces and international forces, they do not want this idea to be spread out. And that's why this becomes much more in the focus for many people who are also searching for the solution in their own country. Because democratic confederalism, which is in development process, for example, in Rojava, is also being adapted in other regions in the world. And you see there are a lot of internationalists coming to Rojava, trying to build up projects which can be beneficial for the people in Syria and Rojava, but also can be beneficial for other people if it can be a good example. And it is a good example. And that's why maybe people have known Kurds more the latest 10 years from Rojava. But before Rojava, there is a fundamental struggle until the Rojava revolution. We need to also understand that. And the background of this fundamental revolution is actually already something which was built up from the idea which Öcalan has put in the struggle. And he has been there for 20 years. He has been speaking with the local people. He has been helping them to politicize themselves, gain the correct consciousness of being Kurd. And this has been affecting the result of the revolution in Rojava. And of course, these other countries sees this. Iran is seeing that there is a revolution going on. Iraq is seeing that there is a revolution going on. Also same with the Turkey. That's why they are involved themselves so much, because they're afraid that it will spread inside. And once it is spread inside, the people who have desire to liberate themselves in these countries, they will be joining with the Kurds just like they did in Rojava, northeast Syria, like Arabs, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Armenians, Turkmens, it will actually destroy the totalitarian fascist regime which is going on in these countries. It is a totalitarian fascist regime. What else you can call it? People are getting executed, for example, in Iran. Thousands of political activists are imprisoned in Turkey, including parliamentarians. And these parliamentarians have not been involved in any kind of activity. They are not guilty in any kind of crime. But as a result of the Turkish state's one-man rule, Erdogan's own rule, you see that there is thousands of people in prisons. Journalists, academicians, lawyers, activists, and a lot of other people who are showing their support for the Kurds. But the problem is that Turkey is a country who wants to be a member of EU. Instead of a lot of European countries who claim that they have democracy in their own country, do not do the enough push and the efforts to make the protest to the Turkish state. If you want to be a part of Europe, you need to change. You cannot oppress the Kurds. And we must not forget, Kurds had to sacrifice a lot so the global terror like ISIS do not spread. And this is something what all the world know. But many countries, they cannot just play the role of three monkeys. I haven't seen it, I haven't heard it. To just ignore about what's going on in Kurdistan. And the most terrifying part of all this, that they are getting involved in this kind of conflict. How? When you look at the weapon industry, they have weapon deals with Turkey. Turkey is a NATO country. And a lot of the weapons which are dropped in Kurdistan, they're actually weapons made by the NATO countries. So we have to ask ourselves, especially here in these countries where people are fighting for the rights of the humanity, but also fighting for the equality and democracy, how fair is the foreign policy their country are having in relation to Turkey? And we have seen that also in NATO process, how Kurds have been also alienated in the countries where they want to be a member of NATO, suddenly like that.
Yeah, I want to talk more about NATO, but before going to that, could you still describe a little bit the Kurdish diaspora in Europe and especially in the Nordic countries? How is their situation?
Yes, the Kurdish diaspora has been very important to help the people in Kurdistan. And they are facing same problem as it is in Kurdistan, but also here in Europe. What is that problem? It's the criminalization. Many Kurds and their institutions are criminalized in the diaspora. And this criminalization process has created problems for Kurds to become the Kurds in diaspora to play their role much better, to become the actor for the solution process. And this is the problem now. What we are facing today is the dilemma between the judiciary aspect and the political aspect. Because when you look at the judiciary aspect of the criminalization, this is totally wrong. But unfortunately, the political relations with Turkey is influencing this judiciary aspect. So if the constitution says that you cannot send a person, extradite a person to Turkey, because there is torture in Turkey, if the constitution says that, but you do it anyway, then you are contradicting with your own constitution. So we have to ask ourselves, why do you have laws? So if this criminalization didn't exist, then it would create better opportunities for the diaspora to go and become a part of a lot of the work, project work, social development work, political work, lobby working in the diaspora to be a part of the solution process. But unfortunately, many people feel themselves intimidated, especially by the Central Intelligence networks in their own in the country they live in, and this creates a serious problem, because we have to ask ourselves how far you are going to play the double standard. Once you clap that Kurds are fighting against ISIS, but you are in your own country, you are criminalizing them, which cannot be acceptable.
And if we talk about the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway and Denmark, what is the Kurd situation here? And especially now if we think the NATO process of Finland and Sweden that started 2 years ago or something like that, and it was going for a long time. And finally Finland and Sweden have joined NATO. How has this been during and after the process?
It's been very difficult, because you see that Sweden and Finland are actually doing satisfying some of the demands which Erdogan is requesting from them. And of course, this is making question marks. Why? Is this what the constitution here and the foreign policy here built on to satisfy Erdogan? Or is this built on for the support from the people of Sweden, people of Finland, to the Kurdish people? And when you go to the streets, when you ask what the people in Nordic, the people themselves, they think about the Kurds, you will get a different answer. But when you look at the governments, you see they have a very different policy. And in Sweden, there was a risk of a lot of Kurds to be extradited to Turkey. And the public opinion, they went to the streets and made three big protests. And that created a wave of reactions from the authors, journalists, academicians, and lawyers, where they expressed their feeling that what their country is doing is not correct, because this is a country where Erdogan is not the prime minister. This is the country where people have voted for democracy. And it's very sad to see, for example, the foreign ministry of Sweden says that Turkey is a democratic country. As a politician, you need to see how many politicians there are in the presidency of Turkey. So all these developments has created mistrust by the Kurds to the government of Sweden, also in Finland, because things cannot just change in one night like that. It cannot just change just because after Madrid summit, Madrid NATO summit, and suddenly things become different. How can it be just suddenly like that? And these politicians have been clapping for the victory and success of the Kurdish people in the international coalition fight against ISIS. But suddenly, because of the interest of NATO, there's a very different policy. and they basically terror labeled Kurds. And this is a worrying question because, especially in Sweden, which has been not in alliance of any military organizational structure for 200 years, and suddenly they are a very different country. And this creates a big mistrust between the Kurdish diaspora and to the country, because Kurds have been friends of these countries for a very long time, and they have not done anything to these countries. Yes, they are fighting against the mentality of the Turkish state, but here in Finland or Sweden or other countries, Kurds have not harmed anyone or anything. And the state of Finland, the state of Sweden and other countries needs to listen to their own people. And the criminalization does not help the situation. It is actually escalating to a situation where people are getting alienated. You cannot live in a country where you are getting alienated. And when you look at the effects of this process, for example, in Sweden, some of the bank accounts in some associations have been closed. So these are NGO associations. Why are you closing this association? Even the football club, their bank account was closed. The Kurdish radio, which was in Swedish radio, for example, for 23 years, it was also closed. And they implemented a new anti-terror law, the 1st of June. They say that was actually drafted against ISIS, but the timing of implementing this law is also, which I do not believe is just a coincidence. So they have stopped to extradite people to Turkey, but at the same time they have not stopped to exporting weapons to Turkey. So to kill somebody or give something to others so the other people can kill is not so much different. And we have to, in a democratic society, we need to discuss this very clearly. And if you can look at discussions in each elections in all these Nordic countries, so including Norway, they don't want to speak about weapon export. And we have to question ourselves why. And this is a NATO process. It has nothing to do with Kurds. If you want to join NATO, it's up to you. But why are you paying? Why does the Kurds pay for that? The expenses of this process. And especially in Sweden, the Central Intelligence have been intimidating a lot of people. And this has created a so-called terrifying conditions. And now there is, for example, a young man who have been resident in Sweden, and they want to extradite him to Germany. So what Turkey says, maybe you cannot extradite to me, but you can extradite him to Germany. And these are policies which can create bad tensions between the people in Nordic countries and the state itself. And it's not acceptable because these countries are examples for democracy, and these countries are examples for equal rights for other people. And these countries are examples for the diversity. And unfortunately, a military organization like NATO's question comes in the picture, and suddenly this kind of important values in the society disappears.
Yeah, if you think a little bit about the future, which way you would hope that the politics in the Nordic countries will develop, what kind of changes you would like to see to the situation?
What kind of change I would like to see is that I would like these countries to stick with their constitution. And this constitution is not based on alienating the Kurds. I would like to see a change where they stopped exporting weapons to countries where civilian has to pay the cost of that. I would like to see a change where these countries play their role to become a part of the solution process of the negotiations. For example, the negotiations process with Öcalan between 2012 and 2015 was between him and PKK and the Turkish state. But also Öcalan said another third party can be the monitoring part of this process. So I believe that these countries can be a part of the solution process in Kurdistan. They should put more efforts to that instead of calling Turkey a democratic country, instead of giving more weapon there, instead of becoming involved in this conflict in a more destructive way. So we need these countries to play the more constructive way. And I do know that they have the capacity for that. And if they make a necessary pressure on Turkey, that the Kurdish question needs to be solved, and they need to be a part of the solution process, not only in Turkey, but also in Rojava, in Iraq. And they want to be a part of humanitarian help, because in Rojava, for example, there is an embargo. And people are starving because the Turkish state have bombarded the infrastructure, the electricity, the water supply, and other telecommunication structure. And there is a humanitarian crisis there. And as much as these countries in Nordic countries have played their role in other conflicts, I think they can do it here. I know that they have tried before, but not in a constructive way, because these efforts have been resulted in a way that the conflict escalated more, just like Norway played in the conflicts of the Palestinian Israeli. It's just like they played in the Colombian FARC conflict or the Tamil question. But also in Kurdish question, there had been some attempts, but it didn't result in a peaceful solution. I think they should focus more on that. And they also need to realize that Erdogan is running Turkey in a one-man rule. They don't respect the opposition, not only Kurds. They don't respect the plural society. And they also need to realize that Turkey is supporting ISIS in logistic, financial, and military way. And this needs to be addressed in their own parliament, and political parties need to become more proactive on that instead of becoming passive, because especially in the NATO process, even the left parties, they have been so silent on this issue. I mean, where are your principles then?
Yeah, and probably this kind of change also needs to be pushed by the ordinary people here also in the Nordic countries, that people have to push their state to do this kind of better policies, right?
Of course, because I believe that the people in the public opinion in Nordic countries are strong, and what they say is in the media, it affects the government. It affects the general public in compared to many other countries in Europe. Actually, it does. So the trade unionists, they have an important role. the civil society organizations, they have important role. People who are working with justice and judiciary aspect of this conflict, people are working for the solidarity. They have a huge impact for this process, and I think when it becomes much more support for the project of the Kurds who are trying to implement, especially in Rojava, and I think it will gather much more broad international support, which can create a bit much more pressure to the regimes.
I would still like to ask about the situation of other people in Middle East, and especially the Palestinians right now when the war is going on in Gaza. What do you think about the situation of the Palestinian people, and do you think there is some similarities and differences with Kurds?
A lot of the freedom struggle, Kurds who were fighting for their freedom, they have been together with the Palestinians since in the beginning of the 80s. So the Kurds learned a lot from them. And Palestinians are fighting for their self-determination, their independency, and so do Kurds. But of course, this is a conflict between Palestine and Israel. There are some similarities, yes, with our struggle, but it's not the same. So it is so brutal to see that civilians has to pay the costs of that, and both sides needs to find a much more peaceful and democratic solution for the conflict. But I believe that the international community is not doing the necessary work to find a solution. Actually, it's the opposite. There are a lot of the efforts is escalating the conflict. So before the conflict started again, they could have done a lot of work, but they didn't. This is the problem. Why are you just trying to do something just because the war has started? And of course, there is several other groups in Palestine. It's not only one group. And what's important is that all these groups needs to come to common idea how they want to process in the future. But there is some kind of internal conflicts between themselves too. And this internal fragmentation doesn't allow the struggle for Palestine to move towards to the right direction. But also Israel, how they do is not so much different with how the Turkey is doing, because it's based on denial. And unfortunately, many Palestinians think that Erdogan is supporting them, but that's not true. Erdogan has a strategic relation with Israel, and this needs to be analyzed very much correctly. And I do not believe the Erdogan regime was ever in the side of the Palestinians. Kurds have much been supportive for Palestine than Erdogan regime was. But as I said, it's important, like how it happened in Rojava, many other different groups in Rojava came together and they developed the constitution called the Rojava Social Contract. And this constitution became basis for the relation between different groups to go and fight for the right of not only Kurds in Rojava and Syria, but also other groups. And now they have a very strong military structure, for example. They have a very strong political structure. And I think this can also be an example how to bring together a lot of other groups in Palestine. But Israel's war is becoming much, much worry. And I believe that any effect of what's going on in Kurdistan is also influencing Palestine, but any effect of what's going on in Palestine is also influencing Kurdistan. So it's vice versa, because those two conflicts has been the most important dynamics in the region. In any change anywhere will move the stones in the Middle East. But I think, like I said, unfortunately, international actors are playing double-faced in this process.
Yeah, and if you look what the Nordic states are doing, they are like actually putting fuel to the fire when they are exporting weapons and importing weapons from both Israel and Turkey, and that needs to stop with both cases. This has been really interesting discussion. Do you have still anything you want to add or any point you want to bring up?
Yes, I mean, in the Kurdish question, there is uh, a possibility for many other actors in the region to become a part of the solution process. Why I am saying that? Because the international community, the people in other places in the world, are also facing the same problem. That's why, as much as the fascism grows in Middle East, I think there is also very much need to create an important alliance for internationalism. And the new perspective of internationalism from the Kurdish movement is very interesting, which needs to be looked on. But I think it's very important to create some platforms here in Europe discussing what's going on there, making the necessary discussions, political or academical discussions, how can we contribute there? Because, like you said, like I also mentioned, that there is a lot of weapons exporting there. So we have to ask ourselves, spending so many millions of euros and dollars to send weapons, will that be the solution? Or spending millions of these monies to organize the civil society, to go there and tell them, we want to be a part of this solution. We want to be a part of, not only by telling, but also become the active, practical part of the solution process. But unfortunately, it's the weapon industry which wins here. It's not any of the parts. So also in Kurdistan, also in Palestine, many people who have lost their lives, they will have children in 20 years. They will not forget what's going on. And we are living in a world in that region where mothers are putting their children to the graves. This is the reality what we are living in. And by pumping more weapons doesn't help. So the international community, the civil society networks in Europe and other parts of the world, needs to address to the issues in a very different discussion platforms. So when you look at that, a lot of these platforms has been disappeared. For example, the European Social Forum, it doesn't exist anymore. The World Social Forum is still weak. And so we have to ask our questions. What is our role in the civil society to become the part of the solution? We know what is the role of the states, like sending more weapons. But what is our role? And I think the paradigm of democratic confederalism can be a perspective for that. Because the paradigm of democratic confederalism developed by Abdullah Öcalan, gives the clear guideline how we can organize ourselves. And we would like to have visit from all parts of the community to become a part of the development projects in Kurdistan, to share their expertise, to help the people to develop themselves, organize themselves, and at the same time bring the experience from Kurdistan to Europe and organize their own community here. And I think this can be only be won by the civil society and not the states themselves.